do I wait for that? No?
No, you can go. Yep, you can start.
All right, well, good afternoon, Portlanders. I'm City Commissioner Dan Ryan. I want to welcome you to the third Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee meeting for 2021. I'm going to ask all the fellow committee members to go do the raise your hand function. There's a reason for this. There we go. And go ahead and introduce yourself and pass it on to somebody that hasn't had a chance to go yet. Again, my name is Dan Ryan. I'm a commissioner of the city of Portland, and I have the privilege of chairing this committee. And my one word to describe how I'm doing right now is I'm curious. I'm always curious at these meetings. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Felicia.
I'm trying to unmute myself. Hello, Felicia Triple-Thumb. I am feeling overwhelmed because school is back in session, but happy to be able to see all of you guys on this call, and especially you, Dan. And I pass it on to Joel.
Joel Broussard, Portland Children's Levy, and I'm excited to be a part of this process and part of this group. I've had the unique privilege of seeing lots of great work done by PCL grantees over the past several months, and it's going to be great to see that information being shared today. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Mitch.
Well, Mitch Horniker, looking forward to a really interesting day today. We've got some great materials. The staff's done a great job as usual. And, everybody's face again. So let's see, Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Mitch. Good afternoon, everyone. Jessica Vega Peterson, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 3. I am looking forward to jumping in. It feels like the school year started, and in a lot of ways, our work around kids has picked up with all of the activities and after school things that are happening. So it's good to be back here. And I'll pass it along to Tracy.
JVP. Tracy Rossi, and I am glad to be here this afternoon. I think I'm feeling, I guess it's Happy New Year since we're in a new school year, and since there haven't been many demarcations of time for the last year and a half, it feels welcome to be here, and I'm glad to be with all of you. And I don't see any other hands.
Now if we could have the Portland Children's Levy staff raise their hands, and Joel, since you got to go first, go ahead and call on one of your colleagues at the Portland Children's Levy staff. And introduce yourselves, please.
Yeah, give it to the new guy to go first, right? But I'll go ahead and pass it on to Meg.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Meg McElroy, and I'm the Assistant Director with the Levy. I work with our early childhood grant portfolio and hunger relief grant portfolio and support most of our data work at the Levy. And I will pass it over to Erica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Bridgman. I'm a grants manager at the Portland Children's Levy with the mentoring and grants and the small grants. And I will pass it to John Coughlin.
Thank you. Hi, my name is John Coughlin. I am the Communications Director here at the Children's Levy, and I will pass it to John Kelly.
Hi, I'm John Kelly. I'm the Financial Analyst at the Levy, and I will pass it to Lisa Pellegrino.
I think I'm the last one to go, so I'll go ahead and introduce myself. But John, your voice disappeared there on the other end.
You say you're muted right now.
And you're muted again.
You're still muted. Your facial expressions are priceless. Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, my speaker is. I've been having also trouble with my speaker, so I keep hitting the button and it wasn't unmuted. Okay. Nice to see you all. I'm Lisa. I'm the director at the Levy. I'm sorry, I'm a little vacation brain. I'm getting my head in the game here. I'm a little behind the April, but nice to see you all.
Well, it's great to hear one's voice. I just wanted to get us started by having you all own the room with us, with all of us. And before we get started today, we need to first approve the minutes from the June 15th meeting. Everyone have a chance to look at the minutes? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, it passed 5-0. Okay. And at this point in time, it's time for public comment for non-agenda items. Has anyone signed up for testimony, John?
Nope, we do not have
Okay.
anyone signed up.
Okay, then moving on, we'll kick off the meeting with some really special, very special guests. Joining us, we have 4 grantee partners who will provide reflections on the service delivery model in our foster care and child abuse prevention intervention program areas during this pandemic. Joel, we introduce our guest speakers and please take it away.
Yeah, and the correction is we are only going to have 3 because we have one person who had something come up today and could not make it. So the 3 grantees that we're going to be presenting today is Cephas Milius from Lutheran Community Services that offers child abuse prevention programming for immigrant and refugee families. Then we have Renee Mosley from Bridge Meadows, and they also provide child abuse intervention programming and therapeutic and community building services to former foster youth and their caregivers. And we have Leticia, who is here from Pathfinders, who is, they also provide child abuse prevention programming for justice, involved with specifically those who are previously incarcerated parents. So to start off, we'll go ahead and have Cephas go first.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cephas Milius. I am the program manager for Parenting in Portland. That's our program's name. And we have a trauma-informed process for parenting support for immigrant and refugee families in Portland area. And started our process right in the middle of COVID. But fortunately, we were ready because in March, the earlier part of March, we had a big community listening session around power and power differential for community members, which is specifically around family wellness. So we were ready. We had a waiting list to start with. Obviously, COVID happened, and there's in our communities there's a large resource deficiency, obviously, and the remote work was quite difficult at the beginning, but we were able to make it happen. And we were able to reach our goal in numbers and also started our first in-person group process in May of 2021. In May of 2021. And since then, every Saturday we've had group sessions that happens 2 hours a day, 2 hours a week. And it has grown out of our hands into the community's hands, and it keeps going. So that's in a nutshell what we've been doing. We have a connection with several community partners who provide mentorship to our youth and parents. Our model is a dual generational model for parents who haven't, immigrant parents coming here. The kids actually grow in different directions in terms of culture and language. So we really focus around the cultural base and the belief systems that parents have, and also make sure that the youth are also connected to those pieces that are really important for them, sustain their culture as well as adjust to this community. I think that's basically what I have. Ask me any questions. We have 3 staff, including myself, and the language group that we serve is Kinyarwanda speakers, Swahili speakers, Tigrinya and Amharic, and Rohingya and Burmese currently.
Thank you so much. Joel, do you want us to wait until all the speakers go to ask questions, or would you rather have us?
Whatever your preference is, I'm flexible either way.
Anyone from the committee have any questions? I think we want to just hear from all three of them.
Sounds great.
Okay.
All right. Renee Mosley, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm Renee Mosley, and I'm the Associate Director of Bridge Meadows. Bridge Meadows is an intentional intergenerational housing community with the social purpose of supporting families who are providing permanency to foster youth. We also are a community of elders that serve to provide support to the families as well as to each other. We've been around for 10 years. This is our first year as a grantee, and we're very excited. Thank you, PCL. So our model really is based on how do we help the community support each other. Each site has a community support specialist, a CSS, and that person really is charged with providing counseling. So they have a counseling or clinical background, but also coaching our elders and our parents and how to meet the needs of the kids. So like everyone I'm sure is gonna say, and COVID was really hard, particularly because of our model. I'll say that in February of last year, when we all started hearing, okay, it looks like it's gonna get shut down. Just being transparent, we were really frightened because we have two vulnerable populations. We have adults 55 and older, and we have kids who couldn't, well, no one could get vaccinated then, but we were really worried. It was scary in the beginning because not only for all the reasons that we were all worried, but the fact that our model rests on connection and support and everything we do is in person. So it really forced us to start to think creatively, but also to recognize that over time, these relationships were built. And so this was also a time to see how strong were those relationships? How strong was our relationship with the community? And, you know, I have to say, we were amazed at how everyone rose up. They called each other, we called them, we text, we did virtual meetings. The kids and the elders found a way to write to each other and leave messages with each other. We had a food pantry that we were worried the food pantry was going to stop. And we reached out to them and they said no, they never skipped a single week the whole time that we were dealing with this. We did have a family that was, so that you get a visual, we are on 2 acres. There are 9 homes for families who are providing permanency, and there are 27 apartments for our older adults. Every time I say that, I laugh inside because I'm technically that, that population. And so we're all on this kind of campus community, and we couldn't hang out anymore. We used to have a weekly meal called a happiness hour. And it was a meal that we did every week, and we had to suspend that. But the fact that we could get the pantry to continue coming in allowed us then to find different ways to share food, to support each other. We did have a family, and they wouldn't mind me sharing this because they've shared it on our video, that was impacted by COVID. The parent was COVID positive, and she has 2 young ones. And we were really worried because not only did she need to keep her kids safe, but how were we going to support her? And the community again rose up, and we did a meal train, and we checked on the kids with homework. We texted the kids. It was a harrowing experience, but at the same time, it feels that it allowed the community to know that they were genuinely and authentically connected. So we, now, well, you know, in May, when we had that brief moment when we could be outside and we could be inside, we started having our activities again, and we've decided to pull back a little. We're still focusing on doing most of our activities outdoors, but the community was pretty resilient, and we learned a lot from their resiliency.
Thank you so much, Renee.
You're welcome.
Joel, one more?
Yep. Nope. Thank you so much for sharing, Renee, as always. Leticia Longoria with Pathfinders.
Thank you, everyone. I'm here representing the Pathfinder Network, and we operate the Center for Family Success that focuses really on increasing family stability and resiliency through Levy support. So we provide really wraparound support for parents, focusing on parenting education and skills training classes. We also offer gender responsive trauma support classes with all supported by family advocates, peer mentors, as well as some early childhood home visitors, and some other just supportive staff that are really meant to wrap around all the needs of the families that we serve. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about some of our successes and challenges over the last year. Lots of challenges become successes because of opportunities that were presented. So I would say one of the things that we found is we've learned new ways to be responsive to the families that we serve and the many needs that emerged when folks were kind of at home and more isolated. So we really felt that we were able to pivot in new ways just through greater understanding of needs for the whole family, not just the parents. So one example of that is we've always delivered kind of food boxes and different food resources. One of the things we implemented was culturally responsive food boxes. So we would actually reach out to the families ahead of time. And instead of, let's say, getting spaghetti, which their family may not eat at all, we were able to get them to order kind of foods that really felt, representative of their culture and the things that they eat. So just really more time and more opportunity to become more responsive. We also saw some increased engagement through providing our classes virtually. So, for a parent that maybe got off work and then needed to get on the bus with their children to come to class for 2 hours, and then, classes that end at 8, and then get back on the bus and get home and be trying to get their kids in bed by 10 o'clock, being able to just tune in virtually actually increased engagement, particularly for some of our moms. So that was really great to see. In some of our classes, we saw between 30 and 40% increase in successful completion. So that was really wonderful to see as well. I think it also allowed us to really invest in training and supervision and coaching of our staff to ensure they had the support through all the pivots that they were asked to do, go virtual, do it on FaceTime, do it over the phone, connect over text. So we invested in actually a new trauma-informed communication model that we trained all of our staff, because it was really clear that a lot of the folks that we served were actively experiencing trauma and all different kinds of adversities, like many of us were. So we needed to kind of step back a bit and talk about and train and coach around how can we communicate with folks differently? How do we support resilience? How do we ensure that we're understanding what's happening behind some of the behaviors that are coming up for the folks that we serve? And it also allowed us, I think, to push the boundaries of being responsive to the different kind of intersecting identities that the folks that we serve have, and to be much more individualized, just because we were pretty much individualizing the service we were providing to each person, because some folks could make it to classes, some folks couldn't. So those are just some of the successes. I think the other thing that I would note is we were able really to focus on doing some family reunification services in ways that we didn't have the capacity to do before. So we were able to successfully help some families get more contact with their children, regain visits, regain custody. So those are things that we're really proud of as well. Some of the challenges I would say for us was just technology, staff navigating technology, clients navigating technology, not having access to technology. So we focused a lot on just getting technology into folks' hands, helping them navigate the barriers, helping them just increase their ability to utilize different forms of technology. And I think just the other big challenge, I think, was just the amount of barriers that we were all experiencing, but particularly for the folks that we serve justice system impacted folks. So some folks, were just releasing from prison in the middle of a global pandemic. And so talk about barriers. So we really had to navigate some pretty significant barriers, not just for the parent, but for the family system. So it just really, again, that pivot, that responsiveness just really pushed the boundaries and our abilities. And then I think data collection, when we were trying to prioritize people and needs, was definitely a challenge. So we had to invest in a few different platforms and technologies to be able to gather the data that we need to or are required. So investing in things like DocuSign. So we were sending over certain documents over in DocuSign, using Google Forms, using all this technology. And so it took so much work just to get it up for our staff to use it, and then sending it to folks who just didn't know how to navigate any of that as well. And so that was a significant challenge. I remember a story of one of our advocates talking about trying to do pre and post assessments over the phone because we just didn't have the technology to get to some of our folks, and really having to kind of stop and ask ourselves, like, what is the priority right now in this moment in the world that we're all living in? So we really had to work together and provide support to our participants, but also to staff who are now in this new reality of still having to do things like measure and count and document. So it definitely presented challenges. And we still want to be able to do all those things because we want to tell the story, both quantitatively and qualitatively, of our work and our impact. And so it took a lot of work, but we're really glad that we were able to push through some of those things because we learned some really new things about the pivots that we made in our programming, and learned some things about stuff that we want to continue even past our current reality. We actually were lucky enough to get an intern that spent pretty much a whole year looking at some of the impacts of virtual programming. So we were able to pull some data and look at different racial groups and their success rates and engagement rates and gender and different family compositions and how they did with virtual services, and a bunch of qualitative stuff too. So we, even through all the challenges, we learned a great deal, and I think we're better at serving the families than we really were before because of all of those things. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you. Joel, is that it from the participants?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment before we go to open it up to the committee?
Not on this item, no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, committee, any questions, observations, statements? Okay, we're a lively bunch this afternoon. I thought there were some themes. Did the three of you find it helpful to listen to one another? That's what I noticed. Your nonverbal was really interactive with one another. So yeah, and I think reminding ourselves that when we're talking about cultural connection and not having what we're used to with connection, Renee, you really hit that out really well with the connection between the elders and the youth. That was very gripping to think about. So thank you for lifting that up. It looks like Felicia has a question.
I just have a comment. I just want to say kudos to all three organizations. And what I want to say is thank you for your resiliency, your adaptability in serving our most vulnerable populations. And I just want you to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to come speak to us. So that's what I really wanted to say, Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Felicia. Anyone else like to make a comment?
I want to say thank you for inviting us to come and talk, and just to listen. Renee, the TCICR, my eyes are, my glasses are not even working. Just what you said really resonated with me. Basically, that's what we went through as well. But just it's been a learning experience. At some level, I think that coming from another country also and working with the refugee community, their resiliency is amazing. So sometimes we don't even think that we've gone through difficult times because the focus is just going through and not really. There's a saying in my language that says, "Gobas and not just mochata," means like, how smoke finds the tiniest hole to just bend through things and come out on the other side. So I always see our processes in that way, that there's a barrier, we're going to remove it. But there's a lot of learning that happens when you're bending through all of these barriers as well. And thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Hey, Leticia, you mentioned that you did some data findings on virtual programming, or actually I wanted to hear, is there one finding you'd like to make sure that we all hear when you did the data mining on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we found, there was a gender difference in the data, which I'm still thinking about and wanting to collect more data on. But the women both qualitatively said they preferred the virtual programming, and they both completed more successfully and did better on the outcome measures that we use when we measure pre and post engagement. So that was something that was interesting. All of them said that they the thing that they missed the most was being able to be in community with the other parents. So that's not surprising, but we got a lot of qualitative comments about not being able to have a graduation and not being able to celebrate their success. So just that recognition of success, and I think just the symbolic of celebration and being in community was something that they still wanted an opportunity to do at some point when we're able to come back together. So we were thinking about how can we integrate that for us moving forward. Trying to think. I think those are two that stick out for me.
Thank you. I have a question for the staff then. We heard some themes about technology and the challenges and adapting to that made this last year special. Have you been hearing that from other grantees? And so we're of course allowing them to target funds for that so they can adapt during COVID. For those who can't see, everyone's heads nodding. They're all saying yes right now to those questions. So I appreciate that. Yep. Any other questions from the committee before we move on to the next item? And also from the guest, if there's any parting comments you want to make. Okay, well, let's all thank thank you guests for being here today. This is the virtual applause right now. And
thank you.
You really lifted up all of our days. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. The next item, John, will give us a financial update on year 2021. Oh, John Kelly.
Yes, me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan.
Absolutely.
Meg is going to share a slide. There it is. So I'm talking about, it's a financial update for the year that just ended. It ended at the end of June. And what we do know is that grant spending was 84% of budgets for the fiscal year. So it's the first year of 3-year grants. And the total grant budgets were $23.8 million for the year. And the actual spending was only $19.9 million, 84%, as you see there on the screen. What is more typical is about 96, 97%. So unsurprisingly, a lot of underspending in this first year, this pandemic year. And we think that it was caused by, or we know from various reports, changes and barriers to service delivery during the pandemic. Now, the majority of the unspent funds can be carried over into the new year. Typically, we limit carryover to 10% of the annual budget, but this year we are allowing unlimited carryover of funds for client assistance, so kind of targeted. We changed that policy to allow grantees to continue providing direct support for basic needs for youth and families during the pandemic and hopefully into recovery. I'm looking at the chat. Okay. So that's last year. What we don't quite know yet is what the current year budgets are going to look like. So year 2 of these 3-year grants, those budgets are still being finalized. So that's a conversation between grant managers and program and fiscal staff at grantee agencies. And we'll have those together fairly soon in the next few weeks. And once those are settled, we'll have a clearer picture of what funds that were previously allocated are no longer likely to be spent. So if folks don't ask for that carryover, those funds will go back into the pool. Our current plan is to hold those funds in reserve in anticipation of revenue declines projected by the city economist last January. So we're not going to give that full picture at this time. We expect to have a new property tax number fairly soon. October, the imposed property tax amount comes out. That's typically fairly close to what was projected the previous January. We build the annual budgets based on the January projections. We will get new revenue projections for future fiscal years in this coming January 22. So that, depending on what those look like, will kind of change the picture, the short term, the long term, and we will of course be paying close attention and be responsive to that. So the headline is unsurprising, a bit lower spending than normal, and we're still waiting to learn how grantees will be able to use that to improve, especially direct client assistance in the year that just began, about 2 months ago now. So I'll turn it over for questions or other comments by staff.
Thank you, John. Kelly, anyone have any questions for John?
I do. So with the wild housing market, will that somehow impact the projections in 2022 in terms of increased, or is it just shot in the dark?
Yeah, we don't know. I sure don't know. So the person that gives us the information is the city economist, and that position actually is in transition. So we hope the new person is as good as the person who was there for many years. Josh Harwood has moved on to a different position. So what happens in January, as you point out, the property tax values that's when property tax values are kind of, a snapshot is taken, and that determines what the new property taxes will be. But yeah, we do not know. Are commercials going down? Are commercials going up? You know, it's just, we're holding our breath. We do not know. Yeah, it's a big mystery because we think a lot of property values have risen, right? So that seems good, but I'm downtown right now, and it seems pretty gloomy down here.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
We'll know in January, which is a good amount of lead time, and we'll know more fairly soon in terms of, as I said, what the current year budgets are. We're sure we're going to be able to maintain services this year, but it's the out years that we really don't know about.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I have a question based on the underspending, and it kind of is connected to the dialogue we just heard from our guest, the grantees. So it was easy to understand why there would have been underspending last year. And then we heard stories of adapting during COVID and repurposing some investments towards technology so they could adapt to the new reality. Are you seeing any trends that speak to some of the anecdotal information we just heard? Do we project that more will be able to then expand their funds this year? And just any of you on the staff,
Lisa or Meg will know more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we are hoping that that's the case. And I would say we're really in the thick of the budget negotiations right now. So we haven't done enough that I can give you a good anecdotal sense yet. But we are expecting that most folks are going to try to carry over those funds and use them. Kind of some of the things that you mentioned around technology, a lot of people have had to upgrade their technology and change and do different things for staff. And especially, I think a lot of people thought we weren't going to be so remote still this year, but it's looking like we might have to be more remote still for a while. So there may be some additional issues there in terms of continuing to upgrade technology. Direct client assistance is definitely going to be, I think that many grantees are going to continue doing that. They've been doing it already, and I think many will continue that with those additional funds. So I expect that the spending would be higher next year, but really we're not in a position to say much about it yet.
I understand. I think that listening to the guest, it's in real time. It's helpful, I know, for all of us to help them adjust and know they can pivot so they can do their resilient work. So, yeah. Okay, any other questions before we go on to the next agenda topic? Thank you, John Kelly. And next, Joel will share some highlights of the grantee convenings today and the plans for this fall. Joel, you're back.
Yes, I am. For those who don't know, in response to feedback that we got Staff have been started planning and been having grantee convenings, aka meetings by program area. And then so after school met last month in August, and the goal was to prioritize how they were going to use that convening time to meet their needs, consider training, technical assistance options that PCL could provide to them, and discuss fall program planning with colleagues. Nearly all the programs attended for that meeting, and using these meetings to connect with one another, to talk about practice issues, to share expertise, and develop relationships with staff of other after-school programs. And that, I just want to say that it's going to be a running theme that you're going to hear me when I talk about all the other program areas. It's like, it was just the overwhelming sense that people just want to connect with each other and compare notes on how they're doing business as it pertains to their respective programming area. So foster care, on that note, so foster care grantees met just yesterday. I facilitated that meeting, and the agenda of that meeting was to basically provide a space for the foster care grantees to share the work that they've been doing with their peers, and they really enjoyed that. And I'm talking about some of the difficulties of that, as well as some of their success. That's one thing I've always stressed with people, is it's so easy to, it's important to talk about all the success. Child abuse prevention intervention program grantees convened for the first time last week on September 7th. And similar to the other programs, grantees met, spending time getting to know each other, programs, talking about eligibility and referral information. What I noted, and they noted as well, as I know do my work with both foster care and child abuse intervention, and it was highlighted today in the guest today, is that there's a spectrum of services that are being of in person versus and virtual. You have some people who are doing mostly virtual. There's some people who are doing mostly in person. But even then, they change. You know, so if you have someone who's doing mostly virtual, they've figured out ways to have some in-person contact by dropping off like a meal kit. Or if you have someone who's doing mostly in person, they will change it due to the person that they're working with. But overwhelmingly, a large percentage of people that in the foster care and child abuse prevention programs are doing what I would consider hybrid, sort of mixture of both. So you have this ebb and flow due to staffing stuff that's going on with them, the clients that they're serving, and probably most notably OHA recommendations. Convened twice so far, with the first convening focused on grantees getting to know each other, oriented to the contracting and budgeting process. And the second convening will provide further community building opportunities in preparation for reporting. They have 2 more convenings planned for September and October, designed to provide training for grantees on supporting BIPOC youth with disabilities, so that grantees can further their work on the disability inclusion goals. In the October convening is designed to provide space for youth with or without disabilities to discuss ways that they can create a more inclusive environment for one another as peers. Mentoring grantees will convene for the first time in October. Similar to the other program areas, mentoring grantees want to use this space to share how their programs are going with their peers, and to learn about the best practices and resources for that program area. Grantee convenings for early childhood and hunger relief grantees are planned for later this fall. Hunger relief will focus on networking amongst grantees, including around shared problem solving around the pandemic, and the early childhood focus has yet to be determined.
Thank you so much, Joel. John, do we have any public comment on this topic?
Nope, we do not.
All right, committee, any questions or statements?
Commissioner Ryan, I'll say Joel, it's good to meet you, first of all, and good to see you on board. I think it's such a great idea that we're having all of our grantees from the same areas have an opportunity to engage with each other and share each other's learnings, and really to be able to have that support and that forum with each other. I think this is really wonderful. And it sounds like those conversations that have happened so far have been really productive for people in a way to connect. So this is just great. I really enjoyed hearing about it. And I think this is such a good move and a really positive move for our grantees.
Joel, have you seen between the grantees with these meetings where they're getting some lessons learned from one granting organization that they can use for themselves in these sort of convenings with the different subgroups?
Yeah, actually, and for example, yesterday, someone was talking about a particular program issue that it's been difficult for them over the past several months, and probably actually since the beginning of their contract period, because they were a newer program. And then people right away, even in a virtual way, they were putting up in the chat, hey, you could try this or this, and giving some other ideas for the grantees. So yeah, absolutely. There is definitely, opportunities to talk about lesson learned and comparison notes, or like, oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, that's pretty cool. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, for that story. I've been on the other side of that, and I think learning communities are really important. And I also think the way that you're setting them up, it seems as though you're letting them be peer-to-peer learning communities. There's no the children's levies there watching them. And I think what I'm trying to get to is it sounds like there's authenticity and openness in the dialogue. And sometimes when grantees and grantors are in the same room, you're posing for those that are investing in you. So I'm not hearing any of that, and that makes me happy. So thank you for holding that space for these learning communities. And it's great to know that this is a trend that the Children's Levy is doing. Okay, so any other questions or statements? Are you all ready to go to the next topic? Okay, thanks again, Joel. Next up is Lisa. She will outline the proposal to create a community advisory committee, and Meg will provide a summary of that feedback on this proposal, and Erica will facilitate our discussion of the proposal. All right, so take it away, Lisa, first.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on kind of just reminding everybody how we got to this point. And Meg, I might have to ask you to share the slides only because the navigation bar has disappeared off my screen and I can't seem to get it back no matter what I do to my view.
No problem. I'll get it queued up while you give the background.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know. I'm having some trouble with Zoom right now. I'm not sure why, but it was working before you all got on. So just to remind folks that this proposal for forming a community advisory committee, where it was coming from, because we haven't talked in 3 months, and I just want to give everyone's head in the game. So our feedback and community engagement from Empress Rules Equity Consulting, and our feedback from the PSU grant making study, and our small grants process that used a design team, all gave feedback that we needed to find some other ways to bring community voice into our work and decision making. So we've been working on trying to figure out what that should look like. And we talked to you all before the last meeting and took your feedback at the last meeting around how we might structure a community advisory committee. So staff then took all that feedback and all set together from numerous sessions, trying to hash out a proposal that we could run by you all and also run by stakeholders to see what people thought. So I'm just going to briefly review that proposal. Thank you, Meg. Just so we're all on the same page with where it's at, and then Meg will give you a heads up on what we found out from stakeholders. So the first thing that everybody wants to know and get clear about is, what is the charge for this committee? What are they charged with doing? So we constructed the charge as to consult and advise both the staff and the allocation committee on policy and procedures that include things like designing funding processes and designing grantee reporting, and community engagement. So these are all processes that staff typically designs. So we would get feedback and include a committee on doing that work. In addition, the committee would also help advise the allocation committee during the competitive funding processes. So right now we have, the funding processes have been structured to include input from certain folks ahead of time in the community engagement, but that has not been, there's been no group that has been charged with recommending to you all for who should be funded in a competitive funding round that is really from the community. Okay, Meg, if you can go to the next slide. So the responsibilities for the advisory committee would be to, of course, participate in required training. The city has a whole framework for advisory committees, so we have to abide by those rules, and that includes certain kinds of training. Prepare for and attend and participate in the meetings, work collaboratively with their team members, and then occasionally participate in coming to you all at meetings to discuss what the community advisory committee is advising you all do. So that's kind of the main responsibilities as we see it. Thanks, Meg. The next slide. So the next slide outlines what we imagine the work to be over the next 4 years. This is obviously malleable because it depends on when this group actually gets formed, assuming that you all want to do this and we go forward and we actually form the group, and then the committee also has to come together and have some voice in what their work is going to be too. So this is a sketch and not something in stone. So this year we would hope that we would be able to form the committee, assuming you all want to do this still. They would create and adopt their bylaws, which is a process, and then review and advise on grantee reporting and accountability processes. I know that you all know we're in the middle of a web grants implementation, and so there's going to be a new process for reporting, and we have an opportunity to set up what that process looks like. And so taking input from the grantees and maybe also from the committee on what that should be. And then next fiscal year, so 22-23, reviewing and advising on the grant renewal process and recommendations. That is the year when we would typically consider renewal, because right now we have 3-year grants and they will expire at the end of 23, June 30, 23. In 23-24, we would be thinking the main piece of their work would be reviewing and advising on community engagement and funding process plans. So that's a whole planning process, usually takes a year to plan it and then a year to execute it. So they would be, kind of going along for that work. And then finally in 24-25, if the levy is renewed by the voters again, they would participate in the funding process, as I just discussed, where they would get a chance to do recommending for funding. Okay, Meg, you can get the next one. So for structure of the group, we looked at a lot of examples, including the Preschool for All solicitation for advisory group members, and we looked at the Portland Community, Portland Clean Energy Fund, which also has committees. We also looked at, the city has a lot of advisory committees, so I looked at several of those, and we kind of tried to look at how big was, doable, and how do people structure terms and other kinds of elements like that. And so these were informed by that, what seemed typical in the field, advisory committees, and what seemed workable for us. So number of members, 11 to 13, with a quorum of 7, a term of a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 6. Meeting time of approximately 12 to 15 hours per year. So let me just be clear, that's not all the time that somebody would have to spend to do this work. That's the meeting time. So we were just imagining how often are they coming together and for how long are their meetings. And then just to remember for everybody that advisory group meetings will also be public meetings. So they have to adhere to all the requirements that the meetings with you all have to adhere to. So for qualifications and representation, this is a lot of different factors come into thinking about how we make sure that this committee would reflect the community. So we would want to be certain that it reflects the racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, and disability of the city of Portland. That it includes people with experience in small and emerging human service nonprofits, not just large organizations. That people live, work, and go to school in the city. We were thinking a minimum of 3 members who live in East Portland and 2 who live in North Portland, since those were the priority geographies from our community engagement process. That those were where most of the youth, or I'd say the largest percentage of youth participating in programs live. Also a demonstrated commitment to racial equity and experience with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, either personal or professional experience. The next slide, this goes on for a few more things. Experience with child and youth serving programs and/or systems that relate to the program areas that we have to fund in. And that experience could be either as a young adult, so we were imagining 18 to 24-year-olds could potentially participate on the committee, parents, people from partner organizations, providers of human services, educators, or advocates. Experience working collaboratively with others on a team, which is key. Commitment to attending meetings over at least 2 years. So that's a fairly significant commitment. And then the last, not currently employed with any of the grantee organizations or having worked for any of the grantee organizations for the last 2 years, and no conflicts of interest with current grantees. And this was really done, Steph felt strongly that we have to make sure that we're making space for people other than providers to have a chance to have a voice, because providers, we're typically in conversation with all the time and have the most voice with the allocation giving and the staff, whereas folks in the community who are not getting currently a grantee don't have as many avenues in for input. So that was kind of the thinking behind that. Training, as we said, the City of Portland requires certain trainings. There are 3 of those. We would need to give additional training on PCL, as well as sort of topic specific as they're handling certain elements of work. We would need to give training on the background and, to allow folks to be able to come into the room ready to discuss whatever the issues are for that, year or set of meetings. Our stipend policy, everybody wanted to have stipends, and we totally support that, and would imagine that we would use the stipend policy allows a stipend of $500 per year per person, which is to align with issues around taxation. People have to claim as income anything they receive more than $500 a year, and the City of Portland must provide a 1099 also for a person who receives from the City of Portland any more than $500 per year. So that was how most of the groups that we looked at who have advisory committees keep their stipending at that level. So that was kind of the reasoning behind that. As far as decision-making method for the group, when they come to consider things and vote or make recommendations, we would want them to come together and agree on that and put that in the bylaws. So they as a group would decide what their method, whether they're going to use a consensus method or a majority voting method or something along those lines. Any questions about any of those specifics that I ran through pretty quickly? I know you've read them in the memo and you've heard about them in the past, so I'm not sure. It's fine if you don't have questions, but I want to make sure to answer what our thinking was if you did.
I did have a question, Lisa, and thank you for that detailed look into the proposal. You mentioned there was a training that the city gives, and then also at the end there was a training that you all were talking about, PCL training. Can you talk about what the city training would look like? Do you know?
Yes, I'll see if I can remember off the top of my head. There were 3 different trainings. There's trainings on what it means to be when you are serving on a committee that is a public board. You have to get training and go through some reading about what that means, what you're allowed to do, and how you have to conduct business, and how like the group cannot meet behind closed doors. They can only meet in a public setting. You can't have you cannot have a quorum of that group meeting in some other way. So there's specific training around that. There's general training around racial equity, the city's racial equity policies, and sort of a common vocabulary for how we talk and think about equity in the city. So there's training on that. And then there's one more that I'm forgetting. I don't know, Meg, do you remember?
Yeah, Lisa, I pulled up the memo, which had it in the outline. It's around discrimination and retaliation, prohibiting those kinds of behaviors and actions by committee members.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer what you were looking for?
Yeah, I just wanted to see what the differences were between the two. So thank you.
Yeah, our training would be more about PCL specific, the stuff that staff would do. So these are the city trainings are online trainings that people do.
So I appreciate the overview, Lisa, and the memo that went into details, and especially the inclusion of all the different feedback that we got from the survey that went out for people around the allocation or the advisory committee. One of the things that I was thinking about was, looking at what their charge would be, advising us on kind of policies and things like that. And I think that's really good. I was a little more concerned about advising on funding recommendations during, during the period of when we're actually doing grants, just because I know what a labor intensive process that is and how much structure there already is around reviewing grants and rating the grants basically and making those decisions like through a lot of our community member. So I wondered what the advisory committee's role would look like in terms of that function. Because if we are saying it's going to be a 12 to 15 hour per year commitment, like I know that time can probably be eaten up as we're going through the grant process itself. So did staff have some ideas of what that would look like, or is that something to still be fleshed out?
I think in part it would have to be fleshed out, because I think one of the things that would be up for consideration is how do you want to design the funding process? Do you want to do the funding process the same way that we have always done it? There could be different ways to do it. So I kind of wanted to leave. I mean, for instance, Erica used the two-step process. I mean, there's, there are different ways that you could think about that. There's a different timeline that you could imagine doing it on. And I think part of what we wanted to leave open was for this group to help advise on what that funding and help have input on designing what that funding process would look like. And so it's hard for me to say what the role exactly would be, in making quote unquote recommendations. I think you're correct in the way that we have done it in the past. That is a huge lift, and staff spends an enormous amount of time giving you all lots of, and I can't imagine that we would still not do our role in giving you information about what's happened in the past with the grants, if there are people who are reapplying for a similar program, or our take on, we use kind of a set of criteria that we would give you information on regardless. But I think that I wanted to leave open that this committee would have some way to weigh in on what those decisions are. I'm not sure what the insertion point would make sense, given, again, that's meeting time. So I'm going to imagine that people would have to spend some time besides going to meetings to be able to do prep. But you're right, people are not staff, they're not being paid to work 40 hours a week to, do this kind of stuff. So it would have to be something that would be doable. Does any other staff want to have thoughts on that? Does any other staff want to respond to?
The only thing I would add is that one thing we learned from gathering feedback from all the reviewers who participated in the large grants review process, as well as the small grants review process, is that they felt like their involvement in the process was important and valuable, and that PCL should keep that. So I think it raises questions about sort of like, do we continue using reviewers? If so, how, and in relationship to an advisory committee? So there are pieces of feedback that we've gotten from grantees, from applicants, from reviewers, and even in this process, in a little bit, I'll talk about community feedback that we got around the proposal, that I still think raised big questions about sort of how we want to do things, but generally that there are there's some value to certain parts of what we've done in the past. And so how we bring them together to include an advisory, I think, is still a functional question. Anybody else want to weigh in on our staff?
I mean, I would be inclined to agree with what Meg just said. In the small grants process, the design team then combined with the reviewers to make those funding recommendations. But at that point in the process, they were only reviewing 12 applications. And so it was a much different level of burden to carry than what we're talking about in the large grants process, unless the large grants process is changed radically, like, for example, doing a different process or staggering out the timing of each program area, or something to that extent that would allow us to kind of break up the bulk. But what I did hear really strongly in the small grants process was the value of the diversity of reviewers, that even design team, which was very diverse, as 6 people, when we talked about different strategies for possibly doing reviewing that would be less people, but with more time, was disinclined at the end of the process to go that direction, because they wanted to have the diversity of voices and lived experience and programmatic experience, looking at all of those applications. And so I think there's a lot to still be worked out and defined as we think about those things. But yeah, those are some things to keep in mind.
Thank you, Erica. It seems like it's a good time to pivot to you, Meg, to give a summary of the feedback on this proposal.
Sure, will do. All right, can you all see that first slide? Okay, good. I can only see a couple of you now, so any head nods or thumbs up or things are appreciated. Thanks. So we took the proposal that you all just heard, and in keeping with our desire to sort of make this iterative and keep getting feedback, we sent it out to over 300 people who are associated with our grantee organization partners, other community partners, and past reviewers of our grant applications. It was an online SurveyMonkey, open for 2 weeks toward the end of August and early September. And we asked 5 questions. The first 2 were Likert scale questions that asked people generally if they felt like the direction we were going with the purpose and structure of the committee in the proposal was something we should be doing, and did they support it? And then also, was membership the direction we should be moving, and do they support it? We asked a question about their whether they were a grantee partner, community partner, or community member, sort of how they identified themselves. We asked an open-ended question for any additional comments they wanted to give, and we asked an open-ended question about how they identify their race and ethnicity. I felt we were lucky to get 69 people who responded to that survey. Over half of them identified as a grantee, about a quarter as community members, 18% as community partners, and 3% didn't answer that question. In terms of race ethnicity, 49% identified as white, 42% filled in that open-ended question in a way that as I analyzed the data in sort of a big category, grouped as Black, Indigenous, or other person of color, and 9% did not answer that question. In the report that you all were given and is posted on our website, there's greater detail on the race ethnicity identities that people shared. So 87% of those 69 respondents said that they strongly agree that they support the proposed purpose and structure of the advisory committee, and that they support the proposed membership considerations for the committee. With regard to purpose and structure, there were close to 9% that strongly disagreed or disagreed with the proposal. 4% weren't sure, and with the membership portion, there were about 6% that strongly disagreed or disagreed, and 7% that weren't sure. And just for a little bit of extra information for you all, there was only a little bit of difference between people's responses by race and ethnicity. So the folks that comprise the strongly disagree and disagree or not sure answers in both of these have, there were about 6 people in each of those. And half of them were folks of color and half were white. And there were slightly more white folks who agreed in both of those categories. So when I say more, I'm talking about 2 to 3 people out of 69 here. 17 people gave us positive comments in general around the proposal. And 4 of those positive comments focused specifically on feeling like the proposal was talking about more oversight of PCL and that reflected values around equity and transparency. 3 people focused on the diversity of the membership in the proposal, that there would be training and stipends. And then 25 people, even though there was big support on the Likert scale answers, 25 people offered constructive comments, asking for additional clarification or raising questions that they feel like we still ought to wrestle with. So 8 wanted more clarity around the goals, powers, and accountability for the committee. 6 suggested ways to assure more representative membership on the committee. 5 mentioned accessibility questions for members of the committee, things like interpretation and translation of materials. And then 4 others raised concerns about the projected number of hours for meetings and work by the committee. And so I have 2 quotes that I will read to you all from responses, because I think that they do a good job sort of raising some of the themes that came out. One person said, and both of these are from folks who were generally supportive of most of the membership elements of the proposal, but who had questions more around structure. So this person said, this is very high level and leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Some important ones from my perspective: who approves the committee participants? What are the guiding values the committee would use in performing its functions? In other words, what problem does this new structure seek to solve? How will the committee make funding recommendations with so little time spent, given staff have normally done this based on their tremendous in-depth knowledge of the sector and individual organizations? What weight would be given to the committee's funding recommendations in the final allocation decisions? So they're asking for clarification on some of the key operational questions. And the second person said, I think the commitment is not enough. Not only should they be meeting monthly, but they should also be part of subcommittees, and the stipend should be higher. It cannot be the same board structure if you want a different result. All the other elements and goals I appreciate. I don't know if 3 trainings is enough. Protocols, agreements, and a shared language needs to be developed. People need to have foundational understanding of the history of racism, how it showed up then, and how it shows up now. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica in a little bit to facilitate discussion with you all. I want to ask if there are any questions from you on those data I just reviewed before I turn it over to Erica. So I'm going to stop share for a minute. And Erica, if you want me to reshare this slide with the questions, I'm happy to do that. You can just let me know. Okay, hearing no questions on feedback results. Erica, do you want that slide shared again?
Hold off on it for a minute. I think I need to go through one question at a time.
Sure.
So we just wanted to start the discussion now that you've had a chance to read the proposal and you've heard Lisa and Meg present on both what the proposal is and on the community feedback. We wanted to start a discussion by first asking if any of you have additional questions about the purpose, goals, or powers of the committee as we have designed it to this point. So if thinking about really the structure, are there questions, concerns, comments about that, the powers, the goals, and the purpose of the committee?
Erica, I don't have any concerns or comments around that. I think that this has been a topic that community members have asked for to have an advisory committee, but it's really more around, my question is, where is this advisory committee complementary and where is it duplicative to what we already do? And that's the more underlying question we should ask ourselves as it's being built. And because I'm thinking about PCL already has a small staff. It takes a lot of you guys, a lot of effort for you guys to staff us, you know, and to add another group of people. I just want to make sure, which wasn't really in all of the proposals, is how many hours is that going to be for you all, you know? And so that's why being really cognizant of where it's complementary versus duplicative is so crucial to the building of this advisory committee.
I mean, I will offer that I think that the amount of hours it takes from us depends on how we build it, you know? So, so that is part of what is still up to be discussed. But did you have ideas to offer, Felicia, on how it could be made to be more complementary rather than duplicative?
Yes, I think around how the funding decision-making process is determined is where I can see a lot of the duplication. So we have to be clear on what the advisory roles, committee's role is and what our role is. So that's the part where I can see a lot of duplication. Where I can see it really being complementary is that you're asking for community members that have their boots on the ground. And so getting their feedback on what they see bubbling up as community need so that we as an allocation committee know is, I think, where it can be complementary as well. So those are 2 examples I can give you on both sides.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in on this part of the question?
I'll just reiterate the comment that I had made earlier, which I think Felicia also brought up, was just, you know, the amount of time and work around the advising on funding decisions, because we have not just this allocation committee, but the review committees and the other, you know, the other committee members who are a part of that process. So just getting some more, you know, details about what that might look like, and so that it's not duplicative. I do think that, as Lisa, I think, said earlier, like having them advise on what that process should be is absolutely within the scope of the work of an advisory committee. I also think that there's a role for the advisory committee as we're looking at this, the Portland Children's Levy being up for renewal in some place. And as we're looking at what are the community priorities for investment around children, they having a role in that discussion too, I could see being make a lot of sense.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that one of the questions in the comments was really good. It said, what problem does it seek to solve? And I think that kind of summarizes what I'm listening to right now. It gets to that value added. And for the public record, I would love to hear the response to that, because this was moving before I know I got here. But what would you say, maybe Lisa or anyone, any veteran on the committee, what you think the problem is that this was trying to solve by adding this advisory committee?
I mean, I think what we heard coming, it really is seeking to solve the problem of feedback to us. So we have heard from sort of 3 different, we worked with consultants in doing community engagement. So they were gathering, 500 different people basically in their process. The Portland State process interviewed both people who had PCL grants and people who were unsuccessful in getting our grants. So they did a whole process around our grant. They were asking more technical questions around process. And so they also felt that we needed more avenues to allow community to influence what we're doing. And Erica, maybe you want to respond to what you feel. So I mean, to us, it was a response to feedback we received. So that is the issue of like allowing more community voice into the decision-making for the levy.
I think that I framed the small grants process from the very beginning, from the community conversations, with the question, how do we create a process, a grant funding process that is strength-based, that's trauma-informed, and that maximizes community voice and participation. And so the feedback that came out of that process was, in looking at what we learned from the small grants process, what are ways to continue to make the funding process strength-based that could be a lesson learned taken into the large grants. And that is how the design team came up with the recommendation, in addition to the recommendations that had been made by the prior processes, to have a community advisory council to really look at ways to make the process be strength-based and community informed.
Thank you, that was helpful. And then I think just the term advisory committee and what I think Felicia and Commissioner Peterson mentioned, it's how do we build it so they're advising us, that they're advising the staff. And so we have real checkpoints on receiving that feedback on how they're advising us and what that looks like.
So with those in mind, what I haven't heard yet are implications or your thoughts about who should be involved with this committee, what kind of membership requirements would be needed to make it accessible, and also the number of hours worked. These were issues that were raised in the feedback. And if the charge is to kind of bring in that community voice that has been discussed, what are your thoughts about how we should shape that in terms of who should be there, what the requirements should be, and how it could be accessible?
Can I ask a technical question, Erica and Lisa? Is it still required that has to go through the Office of Civic Life and Engagement for these advisory committee roles? It's a technical question I'm asking, because that also will make a difference. Because if we want community members to be part of it, that process is not easy. I just want to say that. Yes, so I that's why it's helpful to know if that's going to be a requirement for this advisory committee.
Meg, can you speak to that, or Lisa?
It's my understanding that yes, we have to abide by those rules. There was a set of rules that was made by City Council that all advisory committees in the city have to abide by. So yes, we have to. There's usually an application process for that. You have to submit something. So yes, how we do outreach would be obviously key. And I do want to interject in here to your past point, Felicia, that we anticipate having to hire some additional help to do this. Not just I don't know that we don't know how much we can afford yet, but we also wanted to wait to see what the shape of the job exactly is before we move there. But I expect we would need some additional help.
With that,
particularly around our.
yeah, I would tell you, Erica, and sorry, everybody else, please chime in because I was telling Meg I was coming prepared for this topic, is you're going to have a clear communication line about prepping the Office of Civic Life on accepting these community members, because for some of them will be their first time going through the process. So how is it going to look for them to go through the process? Two, I think going to our grantees are a great resource of recommendations. They can't apply because they're grantees and anybody related to that, but they're a good source, right? Mm-hmm. And then also the way we do our outreach, it should be through grantees, through our social media handles, but also through using part of the process that we use for the small grants process recruitment. So I think all of those are really important. But what's most important in just hearing feedback from other advisory committees, that process that you have to go through with Civic Life is a little clunky and a little confusing. And so I just want to make sure that as you guys are building something with getting, I'm assuming that some of these people will be very new to this advisory role, that we are clear around getting them trained to get through that process as well. So it's not just about coming to us, but how to get through the Office of Civic Life and Engagement, that sort of application process and all of that, if we truly want to be equitable, because some of them might go and that could be a really intimidating process for them. So those are some of my recommendations, and I'll be quiet so other committee members can talk.
So Felicia, I'm hearing you say that once we identify people, that even before they serve on the committee, we need to kind of train them in the application process, the way that I held, for example, application information sessions for small grants to help them figure out how to apply. And I think that could be really important as we're talking about really making sure people are from the communities that are represented in our grantees in terms of all the different kinds of diversity that they represent. I want to open it up for anybody else who hasn't chimed in on any of the aspects of this committee.
One thing I would add, I was very intrigued by the two last pieces of feedback that were summarized, like many questions that were raised. And I think that it is a fair question. It's a lot of work. I do think structurally it would require more hours, time and training than perhaps we had originally considered. And because we are utilizing lived experience and lived expertise, and what we're fundamentally asking really is kind of to right the wrongs of some of our underserved communities, I feel like $500 per person is not enough. In some ways, we're asking these folks to complement paid staff roles. And I feel like to be equitable, to really value that time that we're asking and the experience that we're gleaning from communities, and $500 just feels like it's not the right compensation. Is not the right. It's not the right value to place on what we're asking of people.
Thank you.
So I appreciate, again, great job, great work, great prep. You know, as I said in my one-on-one, this attempt to power shift is going through philanthropy. So we're not the only organization taking a look at this. And all of these questions and concerns, I think, are spot on. You know, scoping it and determining the hierarchy of decision making is critical. It's critical not just for the advisory committee, but it's critical for the people that we're asking to do the ratings. And so we have to get that part right before we start. And I understand that we want to engage the community in designing, but I think we also have to remember and take time at defining community. Right now, 3 out of the 5 votes on this committee are community members. If we treat politicians, elected officials as non-community members. We also know that all of the people that rate the proposals are community members. So again, getting back to Dan's question about what problem are we trying to solve, who do we want to shift power to, and how is that power going to be fit into the existing protocol, or do we need to change the existing protocol? And if we're going to change it, I think we need to be clear about how and why we're changing it. Regarding membership, I think the list is great, but it really does hit on how we define community. If we look at the list, it essentially defines community as people in the system or people providing services through the system. Parents, advocates, providers, all absolutely important folks. What there is, I don't see any references to role models or community participants outside the current system who haven't either been in it or were in it at a younger age and now have moved on to careers unrelated to social service and unrelated to advocacy for social service programming. So again, I'm not prioritizing one group or the other, but just being really careful about how we define community and to what end we're, which is tied very closely to what are we trying to accomplish, who are we trying to shift power to. The other thing I would say just finally is, you know, there's a lot of money being spent or the taxpayer money that's going to be spent through the Homeless Services Measure that is focused and hoping to make systemic changes and aligning these sideload systems. And we are a big player in that system in the city of Portland. And so when I think about who we want to make sure is at the table, I would think, you know, we got to think about the adult homeless system. We've got to think about people who are experienced with doing system change work, because alignment is going to be key, especially when you think about the preschool for all measure and money that will be coming on and how much we invest in that space currently. So again, I think this is really good stuff. It's important stuff to talk about, but these are really deep, and I think we need to be careful. And I'm certainly not comfortable making any decision today. I think a lot more work and thought and study needs to go into doing this so that when we end up with something that people feel good about signing up and they have that, we have shifted power to them in a way that they understand and we understand, and then that we can follow so that they feel fulfilled answering the request to participate in the community.
Thank you, Mitch. So I know that we need to kind of wrap up this part of the discussion just a second. Before we do that, I'm wondering if Lisa, you're able to kind of address Mitch's question in terms of like, how was community defined? I know how, I have a sense of what people were talking about in terms of how community was defined in the small grants process, but in terms of what we heard from Empress and PSU, when they were talking about wanting increased community involvement, like what types of people or community members they meant. Could you just say something about that?
I mean, it's typically people most affected by, you know, the services. So that's I would say how community was described in those recommendations to us, was people who are using these services, people who are involved in these systems, have a voice in shaping where resources are put. So you're right, that was our definition of community focused more on that.
Yep, and I would say small grants was consistent with that as well. So as we kind of wrap this up, I'm wondering, you know, in the agenda it said if we needed to make a decision of any sort here. And so what I'm wondering is, are we wanting at this time, is the committee wanting us to go back and take some of these recommendations and notes that we've heard from you and come up with a revised proposal? Or is the committee wanting us to move forward with the proposal more or less as it is, and then kind of tweaking it as we look for members? Like, how would you like to proceed? I'm not quite sure how to put that into a vote, Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you. You did a really good job of synthesizing what just happened. If I'm reading the room, I don't think we're at a point where I mean, I'll ask the committee. It doesn't seem like we're at a point where we want to move anything tangible on this, but we want you to take the feedback that was delivered today. And I think feedback that you'll continue to get from us over the next month. Maybe there could be some one-on-one check-ins as we reflect on this conversation to move it forward, and have a date for the next meeting to get more concrete about what that looks like. And at this time, is there any other comments that we'd like the staff to chew on, if you will, as they formulate that? Anything that you haven't had a chance to say? Really good topic, really good points being made.
I just have one more thing to add.
Yes.
I think that when PSU and Empress Consulting gave you all feedback, I'm imagining is when you had a different staff. So I just want to say, I think that this current staff does a brilliant job, and that you all represent quite a bit of lived experience and expertise. And I just wanted to add that because I don't know if it was the same staff makeup at the time that this feedback came through. So from a staff perspective, I actually do think that you all do a very nice job of representing the community. So I wanted to add that. That time happens, and we've come a long way in the last year and a half. We have to all admit that. It hasn't been all awful. And I think one of the lessons learned is that inclusion and adding people's perspective and voices to groups just like this does have an impact, a positive impact.
John, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Yes, we have a member of the public that would like to comment on this item.
Oh, great.
That's me. I'm Dennis. I'm actually here for the next item. I'd read the notes on this and seen it and been part of the survey process. I'm executive director at Janus Youth Programs. We're one of the largest youth serving organizations in the Northwest, actually, and in Oregon, working with about 5,000 kids, but kids are from 0 to age 25. So we cover this whole range. That's why I'm here about the next part. But I've also been, and we've been part of the Children's Levy since it began. I can tell you at Janus, we have over 100 different contracts. We have city, county, and state contracts in Oregon and Washington, and federal contracts, multiple ones. Many of them go through grant review processes. The things that I am on pins and needles about as a participant in the process and the kids that we represent is I believe that the Children's Levy has created the most effective process for accurately assessing grants and needs and making decisions, whether it's not whether you agree with them or not, but is the process a fair one, and is it a professional one that actually gets to the end point of helping the kids? And I have never been through a process, whether we got money from you or didn't get money from you, and felt unfairly treated or judged. And the concern I have is I really see the need for voices, and we need more voices informing all of us about the work we're doing. But when you start taking it into a fundraising element and you start putting them as part of the fundraising decision-making, that's a completely different process. And that's a foreign process to people in the community. If you've never worked in this before, I think they can help set goals and objectives and give feedback about how that is happening. But I just had to say, as a participant, I would have a great deal of concern. Number one, if we created a 2-level process, and number two, if you put people who didn't have that knowledge, depth of experience, your staff do it, and that's why it works so well. And then bring it to you, and you have a group of people who have worked together on this and understand each other and understand those decisions. And if you put another level in the middle of it or over the top of it somewhere, I think that's going to get very confusing, very challenging, and probably at some point it's going to be unfair to some of the participants that are trying to, and unfortunately, the more bureaucratic it gets, the people who are the unfairest too are often the smaller organizations that are trying to reach the very kids that we're trying to reach. So that's just, I just had that reaction to the fundraising piece of it. And I wasn't intending to say that, but I had to, so thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And we'll get to the next topic soon. Erica, Lisa, do you need anything else from us to move on? Are we ready to move on? And I think is the next meeting in December?
The next meeting's in December, and I think we can try to tweak you gave a lot of feedback today, and also there was some one-on-one feedback. And so I think we can take that feedback, refashion this, probably maybe take another round of stakeholder feedback out there on whatever we come up with next. So that by the time we get to December, we're closer to making a decision on it. So I hear what I hear from you all coming is you want some more specifics and you want some potential changes to what we've proposed. And we'll go back and do that and bounce that off you and bring it back in December. Maybe you'll be more ready at the decision level.
Sounds good. Leaning towards transparency and hoping not to say something that should have been said earlier. When we were I like the conversation about defining community. That was really well done. I think conflict of interest is one that also gets very confusing at times because you want people with the direct experience of like the guest here, Dennis, that has run an organization. That's helpful. But of course, they can't have an opinion if they're wanting the funds. And so I do think conflict of interest sometimes gets very gray. And I think that we just need to make sure we lift that up and have a dialogue about that. And I heard lived experience, and even that term can get isn't always as easy to define as people think. So I'm just putting it out that those are two things hanging in my brain at the moment.
Hey, Dan, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
Also, I mean, kind of apropos to our first discussion about how many hours this is going to take, I would be happy to, and maybe that's what Lisa was proposing about going back to community, coming back with one-on-ones or groups or whatever, but this is a really important topic. I think there's energy to find something that will work. And I for one, and I bet everybody else would be happy to spend some more time between now and the next meeting, trying to move it forward so that staff has more clarity on you know, at least what our thoughts are, not that they're the best thoughts, but there's the best we can do in terms of thoughts.
If I can chime in, I appreciate that. I can tell that Meg does too. I see her nodding her head. And, you know, I'm happy to help out with the staff to kind of revise and think more about how to take all this feedback. I do also just want to reiterate that one of the reasons why we have the small grants process is we heard in the Empress and PSU process that there were communities and populations that we weren't reaching, or that we weren't reaching adequately, or that we couldn't demonstrate that we were reaching. And in order to reach those populations, we need to be able to do things differently than what we've done, which didn't reach them. And so that also means bringing them into the process in some kind of way. And so that's part of why we're trying to do things differently. So just kind of reframing that and bringing that message back to those.
No, thank you, Eric. I think you have full support on how to embrace this. It's just that, you know, when you add something into a system, the whole system's influenced by that. So we just don't want to add this in and not be cognizant of how it connects the whole organizational flow. And I think all of us were giving some great feedback, being sensitive to that. And so we don't add more obstacles to make innovative, creative, wise decisions. So, yeah. Okay, great topic. And we all are committed to working with all of you on the staff between this meeting and in the December meeting on this topic. Okay, thank you. There's anyone from the public? Was that it? Dennis, you were you got in. John, anyone else?
No, that's it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, the next agenda item. I know we're all concerned about the challenges young people in our community face when they reach 18, and we've had some dialogue about that. I'd like to use part of our time today to begin exploring this issue further. And to kick off that discussion, Lisa will review the Levy's past resource allocation policies and some data on age groups served by the Levy funded programming to frame this discussion. I turn it over to you, Lisa.
Okay, thanks. And my Zoom seems to have come back up, so I can share my screen.
Okay, I'm ready if you need backup.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully it will work. So just again, I wanted to first, before I go to slides, give you some background, because I know not all of you, some of you have been here for longer. Mitch, I think is at this point the longest tenured member, but not all of you have gone through the beginning of the funding process all the way through. And so I wanted to make sure that we fill in that blank before we begin this discussion around how to best support young adults or older youth. So before, what happens typically before funding rounds is the committee will allocate the funds that the city economist projects we will have by program area, because those program areas are required to be covered by the ballot language. So that's something that is typically done at that beginning time. And from the beginning of the levy, so way back 2002, 2003, the committee made a policy decision to invest a higher amount of resources in services for young children, based on the research that was kind of coming out at that time, showing that it was the most cost-effective investment to achieve positive outcomes for youth. And so the committee made, it was a conscious policy decision to do that. In addition, the committee also looked at the fact that services for young children are sometimes more expensive to deliver because of the ratio requirements for adults to children in settings where the child is not with their parent or caregiver. So there must have more adults for the number of children. So that makes certain kinds of in-person services more expensive. So those were two policy issues that framed up the original allocation of resources. When programming for foster youth was added as a program area to the levy in 2009, we received a lot of public input from stakeholders, so community members and all sorts of people involved in the foster system, that it is really important to support youth who are leaving the foster system because they don't necessarily have natural supports at 18 in place when the formal foster system ends. It's to support education, training, moving into post-secondary careers, those kinds of needs. So there was a conscious decision again made at that point to deliberately cover services for children or for youth aged 0 to 24. So to make sure we would cover that period of time when youth are leaving foster care. So those were sort of the past decisions that were made that framed up some of the data that I will now provide for you. So let me just open this up. I'll show you some colorful things. Okay. There we go. So can people see okay? Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. Sorry. Okay, so this first slide shows, oh wait, there we go. The first slide shows funding by program area. And so this, we chose a 5-year period to show you the data on, because this 5-year period had the most stable group of investments. So these are mostly, we're talking about the same programs being funded in this period of time. And it also did not include the major part of the pandemic year, which as you know is interrupted service and caused all kinds of data collection problems for people. So, so this was sort of the most stable period we could look at. And as you can see, those policy choices that the levy made at the beginning have been kind of carried through to the pretty close to the present day. I want to caution you, the information you had in your memo was actually incorrect on the percentages. So please look at the slide, not in the memo. We accidentally constructed this pie chart missing the hunger relief program area. So if you see where resources are concentrated, as you can see, early childhood has got the largest share of any program area compared to the others. So you see mentoring and foster care having similar level of resources. After school and child abuse prevention also similar. And then the special initiative is the community child care initiative, which serves over a broader age spectrum. So those policy choices were reflected in the dollars that were invested over time. So we also tried to create an estimate of funding by age group. So this is not something that we typically track, and our age categories are set in the demographic form. So we're dealing with the data categories that we already collected. I don't have the ability to break that down or change it at this point, since the grantees that they've reported in those 5 years have already done that reporting along the categories that we asked for. So the way we estimated funding by age group was to look at the percentage of children served in a particular age group in each program area, and then come up with, attribute that percentage of funding to that age group. That's a pretty rough way to do it because interventions all cost different amounts depending on what they do and the level of intensity there. So you have to take this with a pretty, maybe a pound of salt. You know, this is the best that we could do to try to look at that. So you can see that resources, again, are not surprisingly concentrated in prenatal to 5, with 54% going to that age group. And then probably really a similar level of resource going to school age youth. So youth age 6 to 15 and also through 18, 16 to 18. So that's how our data breaks down. And then you can see 19 to 24. So it's not 18 to 24. This is the category that we had on our forms is 1%. So a pretty small amount of funding for that age group. And then last, I just wanted to make sure that you, as you enter into this discussion, that you remember in terms of children served by age group. So this is, and just to be clear, there's no hunger relief included in the slide before in this slide, because hunger relief did not have a good method for gathering data of age groups served because of household information. When food goes home, it goes to a household and there are people of many ages in it. And it took a while to get systems in place to be able to collect that detailed level of data for everyone in the house, as opposed to just the person who might be coming to pick up food in a food pantry. And that's the food pantries and during that time period were the bulk of the food relief that we were funding. So you can see that percentage of kids served 0 to 5 was 33, and 6 to 15, 55. And then if you add, the bulk of the kids that we're serving are school age kids, age 6 to 18. So that's the data that just kind of shows you where we've been. I'm happy to take any questions, but Commissioner Ryan is going to kind of lead forward on discussion questions from here.
Sure. I think all of you just had a chance to look at 3 different slides, and what I love about data is you usually have some reactions when you stare at it. So what are some of your initial responses?
I just had a question. Do we have the level of detail to see how much is in the 0 to 3 range? You know, we talk about prenatal to 5, but I'm just wondering if we have the prenatal to 3.
Yes, Commissioner, we break it out by prenatal to age 2 and then ages 3 to 5. I don't have a way to overlap the prenatal to age 3 because we ask people not to report client level data to us, but all of data at the aggregate level for their program. But if you want it broken out by sort of those 2 different groups in the early childhood category, we could certainly do that.
Yeah, I would be interested in that 0 to 2 range as opposed to the 3 to 5, just to see the difference there. Since that was
absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner. I brought this topic up in one of these meetings and then with Lisa, and it's been over the last 20 years, this has been developing, and it goes way back to even my own life experience at that age. But I went to a high school with high poverty and many people from communities that didn't have natural access to what's next after high school, if you will. And it was just so obvious how our society in general isn't very kind to those that reach the age of 18, unless you're in a family with resources and a culture connected to resources. So I didn't know what the data would look like, actually. So it was a little startling and gripping to see that it was 1%. That said, that's why I think we need to have this dialogue. I also know it's called the Children's Levy, not the Children and Youth Levy. And many times when we hear the word youth is when we think of that age group from 18 to 24. But I'm not shy about being an advocate for that age group between 18 and 24, because I do think that you're still in that child youth space in terms of needing access. And again, when I look at data and success, all transitions are hard. The transition to kindergarten is a big one. The transition from 8-9 is a big one. But there's nothing with a deeper canyon and gap than that transition from high school to what's next. And you really see those that don't have resources and don't have those close to them in their lives to mentor them into that next step usually fail miserably. And so that's why I brought this up, to challenge us to see if we can stretch the Portland Children's Levy to those age groups from 18 to 24. And so far, this data is telling that we don't have a history of doing a lot of investments with that age group.
Yeah, Dan, those are great points. You know, it's difficult to have these conversations without getting trapped into the scarcity model, because you immediately like, well, there's more need to go around. So if we're going to have the conversation, I really hope we can do it putting the money aside and whether we're going to fund it to whether this is something that we should be looking at, and then figure out, you know, if we can find some money to do it or not. I mean, the foster care system is the easiest to analyze because it's so I mean, compared to what it was 25 years ago, it's a lot better. Is there evidence that it is working at a high level? No. We know the model isn't working because one of the largest feeders of adult homelessness is foster care. So to me, we can look down the line and say what we're doing for the children's levy, but any kid that touches foster care has a much, much, much higher probability of ending up homeless as an adult. And the transition that you talk about is a big part of it. But, you know, what are the other feeders of adult homelessness? LGBTQ, all BIPOC kids are overrepresented in adult homelessness. Formerly incarcerated or kids touching the criminal justice system, way overrepresented in adult homelessness. So, I mean, for me, putting aside the money part of it, it's an absolute no-brainer to say we should be looking at this and trying to do more, because all we're doing is passing so many of these kids off to the adult homeless system. Not only doesn't that feel right, but I think we all know the earlier we get people, the higher our chance of helping them is. So I'm a big fan of trying to drill into this and see if there's something we can do.
Mitch, I appreciate that. Please know I'm not looking at this as a or, it's an and. And I also know, as Lisa mentioned, we have time to vision this and work it out. It's not the December meeting that we have to come up with a decision. And since we're in the off season, if you will, I thought it was a perfect time to start visioning how we can look at maybe having a different type of categories of focus going forward. When would be when does the next one go out to when does the next proposals go out for large grants? RFP?
We typically do that once in every levy authorization. So not till the levy would be authorized again. So the levy would be up for reauthorization. I mean, that's a political decision, not one that staff makes. But the current levy will run out in the June of 24.
Okay. So we have a good year of dialogue on this. Is that true? Based on being an optimist that it will go out to the voters again, and we would like to have clarity on what we're bringing to the voters, of course. And so would you say we have a good year to have this type of dialogue?
Or more.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, partly our current.
That's not to kill the urgency. That's just to let everybody know that we don't have to make a big decision today, or at the next meeting, like the former topic. The prior topic.
I mean, it's good to keep in mind that the ballot language that we have right now constrains what we can invest in, and those program areas are in there. Exactly. And so the ones that are in there, there's less room to move on age groups, and because obviously early childhood is an age group. After school programs are an age group that serves school age children. You know, there's certain program areas have more limitations.
That's the point I was trying to get across, is that we are systemically looking at that at this moment, beginning that dialogue.
And keep in mind, hunger relief is serving that age group. So, but we didn't have good data from the past to show that. We will have, well, this year, of course, with the pandemic, I don't want to really talk about data because it's a sad topic. So it's going to be difficult to know how that breaks down in the pandemic years, because we are focused on getting food to people who need it, not on the age of the people who are getting it.
You know, with the time of the clock ticking and Dennis Morrow's here. I think this was actually the topic you wanted to do some testimony on. Can we turn that over to you? Is that good, John? Okay. The floor is yours. Is it like 3 minutes, basically?
Ready?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So again, I'm Dennis. I'm with the Janus Youth Programs. We operate 35 or more programs in 20 different locations in Oregon and Southwest Washington, concentrated in Portland area. We're pretty unique. We work with children and youth from age 0 to 25. We are one of the largest providers in the state for services to homeless youth, age 16 to 25, but we also operate the largest teen parent program in Oregon, working with over 200 moms and their babies. And that's part of what we fund through you. So we know what the need is. When you talk about the need, I'm here for 2 reasons. The original reason, and I've already heard it dealt with, which is this can't be an either or, because as I see it, this was passed originally as the Portland Children's Levy. And when people say Children's Levy, they don't think 16 to 24-year-old youth. I do, but most of us don't. But if we can do a both and, if we could add resources and then look at targeting it, yeah, we've got a lot of data through the homeless youth system and through the other systems we work in that can tell us where that real need is. Quick example, we operate Rivera. We opened it about 5 or 6 years ago. Rivera House is the first and only program, we believe, in the entire country working with LGBTQ youth transitioning out of Oregon Youth Authority, coming back into society at that 16 to 24-year-old age. Before that, there was not a program anywhere, and we had to actually create it. We operate the Hope Project. The Hope Project, we go into McLaren, the largest juvenile justice institution. Somebody was talking about that. And we help these young men become out as a whole citizen. We have just approved 16 college scholarships for boys that are in McLaren right now. They will be going to college and they'll graduate in some cases with master's degrees when they come out of college. So it is possible to turn it around, but that's resources that are expensive. So we are an active supporter of the Children's Levy, and we continue to be. This is what I wrote down before I heard your recent discussion, that most people don't think of an adult brain not being fully developed. We know it if you work in the work. Adult brains don't come fully online until 23 to 25, and that's if there's no trauma in the child's life. If there's trauma in the child's life, it can go 4 more years beyond that. So we know that this, and somebody was talking about return on investment. What we've done resources, because we have another grant that we get from Clark County, and they require us to show them a return on investment. If we give you money to help house homeless youth, what's the payback to the community? Last year, when I did my calculation, one homeless youth who at age 25 does not end up an adult homeless person saves the community $2 to $3 million. $2 to $3 million in resources. The 3 is for the girl side of it, the female side, because they have higher community needs as they have children growing up. But every youth that we get, and we have in our housing programs, we have a 90 to 95% success rate of youth maintaining housing once we can get it into them. So I'm a complete believer, and I wasn't planning on sharing that to you, but I do, a complete believer in services that are targeted and developed for these youth and operated by organizations that know how to work with these youth. You can have astronomically high success rate with them. But I would never say that we should then take 1/3 of the Children's Levy budget away from little kids to give it to the bigger kids. And that's what I was really here to say in the beginning is we work with both, and I don't want to have one cannibalizing the other. But if you want an advocate for saying, do we need this resource? Yeah, so maybe it is a Portland's Children and Youth Levy. I don't know how you frame that, but I'm just saying is I'm glad we got a couple of years to think about it, and I will actually be willing to work with you, share data, give you any information. We have a homeless youth system in the county that collects all the data for the homeless youth, for instance. And so we have massive amounts of data we could help you with. But you're on the right track in saying if we don't stop it, at age 16 on, that's where the vulnerability is huge. And if you look at what we do on the streets with the homeless youth right now, highest level, people talking about mental health, highest level of physical health issues, highest level of violence is happening with these kids living on the street in a tent or sometimes not even a tent. We operate the only shelter in Multnomah County, and we have 50 or 60 youth every night that we can get off of the street and eventually help them get home. So the programs are there that will work, and I'm here to share that with you, but I really came today just say, I don't want to take from the little kids to give to the big kids, because I don't think that was the intention. When the voters voted, they weren't voting for 25-year-old kids. But could they be educated, and could that be possible? Yes, I think so. Are there ways to do that? Or if you got more money and added it in, that's okay. but I just didn't want it to be a cannibalizing thing, which we oftentimes do in the children's arena. We often say, let's take a bite out of these kids so we can take care of these. That's not what we want to do. So I really love your process. I love the way you think about this, and the advanced thinking on it is fantastic. And again, totally there to be available if you need, or if we can provide resources or information or help guide you to places where it is, because we've got all of that data to share. And appreciate you recognizing that kids don't stop being kids at 16. That's the absolute truth. And if we grow them up right, we have contributing citizens. I have a last story. I have a young woman who started on the streets in Portland at 14 years old. She was a drug addict. One of our outreach workers started working with her, and she kept telling him, get away and leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you. And they kept going back and back and back. That young woman went into shelter. That young woman is in California today, a physician. We helped her get a college scholarship to go to Portland State, and then a college scholarship to go to Oregon Health Center. And she came out and she said, if that one person had not kept coming back, even when I didn't want nothing to do with him, I told him to get the fuck out of my life, her language, not mine. So if he had not kept coming back to me, I would still be on the street today. So that's the stories that we want to tell. And thank you for doing what you do, because I really love the work that you have done in this community to highlight the needs of those kids. I just, yeah, again, don't want it to be a cannibalism, want it to be a shared resource that we can grow and develop. I will shut up. I probably went over my time.
Thank you so much, Dennis Morrow. That was a great testimony for us to hear as we begin this topic. I'm going to suggest, because the clock's ticking and we all have hard stops at 5, that we take this topic into the next meeting as well. We'll in the agenda or in the note out, we'll have some leading questions for you to contemplate as we bring this back for dialogue. And does that work for everybody? All right. Okay, so thank you all for joining us. Our next meeting will be December 14th from 3 to 5. Agendas will be sent to the Levy email list and shared on Facebook and posted on Portland's children'slevy.org. We welcome your participation in these meetings, and we would like you to join the next meeting and comment on agenda items that work for the work of the Levy. And please do so by visiting the website and join our email list. With that, I thank all of you for your active present participation on behalf of our children, and I'll just say it, youth of Portland. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thanks.
Thank you.